I work nights at a bed and breakfast on the southern edge of Asheville, in a house that has been a house since 1898 and an inn since the late 70s. The owners are a retired couple named Dell and Margaret, and they spend most of the year traveling, which is how I ended up living on site in what used to be the maids' quarters. My job, in their words, is to be a warm body in a warm building. I check guests in. I make sure the doors lock at 11. I clean the rooms after checkout, and I prepare them again before the next arrival. That's the part of the job that should be simple. That's the part of the job that stopped being simple about 4 months ago. Because someone keeps getting the room ready before I do. I want to tell this the way it actually happened, not the way it sounds when I summarize it. Because if I summarize it, you'll picture a ghost story, and this isn't quite a ghost story. It's something quieter than that. It's something that took me a long time to even notice, because the strange thing about it was how helpful it felt at first, how considerate. Like a roommate you've never met making your coffee in the morning, except the coffee tastes faintly wrong, and you can't remember ever telling them you drink it. So let me start at the beginning. Let me start with the house, and with the reason I came here, and with the way the work used to feel before it started feeling like something else. The inn sits on a curve of road that climbs up the side of a small mountain just south of the city. From the front porch, you can see the lights of Asheville at night, scattered across the valley floor like spilled change. From the back garden, you can see nothing but trees. And beyond the trees, more trees. And beyond those, the long blue ridges of the Blue Ridge Mountains, stacking up against the horizon like layers of paper. The driveway is long and gravel, and it crunches under tires in a particular way that I've come to know better than my own footsteps. When a car turns in at night, I hear it from inside the house, even from the kitchen, even with the dishwasher running. The driveway tells me when guests are coming. The driveway has never been wrong. The house itself is 3 stories. The ground floor has the foyer, the parlor, the dining room, the kitchen, a small library Dell uses as an office, and what used to be a sunroom, but is now a sort of overflow sitting area, where guests can drink coffee in the morning and look out at the garden. The second floor is the guest floor. The third floor is the attic, which is locked, and which I have no key to. Margaret told me once that there's nothing up there but old furniture and Christmas decorations and the kind of boxes nobody ever opens. I've never had a reason to doubt her. I still don't, really. I just notice, sometimes, that the floorboards above my bedroom creak in a pattern that feels less like settling and more like walking. I stopped paying attention to that a long time ago. You learn, in an old house, to stop listening for certain things, or you go a little crazy. The inn has 6 guest rooms, all on the second floor, and they're named instead of numbered. Holly, ash, maple, linden, birch, and willow. The naming was Margaret's idea, back when she still cared about that kind of thing. The rooms are arranged along a single long hallway that runs the length of the second floor, with a window at the far end that looks out over the back garden and the slope of the mountain behind it. 3 rooms on the left side of the hallway, 3 rooms on the right. Holly, ash, and maple on the left, in that order from the stairs. Linden, birch, and willow on the right, in that order from the stairs. The hallway carpet is the color of dried moss, and it muffles every footstep so completely that you can stand at one end and not hear someone walking toward you from the other. I noticed that on my first night. It seemed charming then. A quiet hallway in a quiet house in a quiet part of town. I took the job because I was tired. That's the most honest answer I can give. I'd spent 6 years in customer service for a software company in Charlotte, and I'd reached the point where my own voice on the phone sounded like a stranger's. I had a small apartment with thin walls. I had a relationship that had ended badly, then ended again. Then ended a third time the way things end, when neither person wants to do the actual work of leaving. I had a savings account that went up by about $40 a month, which meant in real terms it was going down. My sister Becca knew Dell from some volunteer thing at her church, and when she heard they were looking for a live-in night attendant, she sent me the listing without asking me first. The pay was modest, but the rent was free, and the duties looked manageable on paper. Greet the late arrivals, lock up at 11, sleep light, clean in the morning, reset the rooms. I drove up for the interview on a Saturday in late June. The drive from Charlotte to Asheville is about 2 hours through hills that get steeper and greener the closer you get, and by the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, I was already half in love with the place. The house was painted a soft pale yellow with white trim. There were rocking chairs on the front porch. Margaret met me at the door, wearing a denim shirt and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and she made me a cup of coffee that was somehow exactly the right strength, and she walked me through the house room by room as if she were introducing me to her relatives. This is Holly. Holly is our smallest room, but she gets the morning light. This is Ash. Ash has the clawfoot tub. This is Maple. Maple has the writing desk with the broken drawer. You have to lift it as you pull. And so on. All 6 rooms, each with its own personality, each with its own quirks, each with its own small secret. By the time we finished the tour, I felt like I'd been hired already. And I think Margaret had decided the same thing, because she didn't ask me any of the questions you usually get asked in interviews. She just asked if I was a quiet person, and I said I was. And she said, "Good. The house likes quiet people." I should have asked her what she meant by that. I didn't. I started 2 weeks later. That last part of the job, reset the rooms, that's what we called it. Margaret had a whole binder for it. Laminated pages, color photographs. The bed made a specific way with the quilt folded at a specific angle. The welcome card placed at a specific spot on the writing desk. The curtains tied back with the sash on the left side, never the right. There was a checklist taped inside the closet of every room, 22 items long, and I was supposed to go through it from top to bottom every time a guest checked out and a new one was scheduled to arrive. The binder was the closest thing the job had to a Bible. Margaret had photographed every room from every angle, with arrows drawn over the photos showing where things should go. The angle of the lamp, the position of the wastebasket, the exact spot on the writing desk where the welcome card should sit, neither too close to the edge nor too close to the lamp. For the first 2 months, I followed that checklist religiously. It was meditative work, the kind of slow, repetitive task that lets your mind drift somewhere clean. I'd put on a podcast or some old country radio station on the small Bluetooth speaker I kept in my apron pocket, and I'd move from room to room with a basket of fresh towels and a spray bottle of vinegar water, and by noon, the whole second floor would smell faintly like clean linen and lemon, and I'd feel something close to peace. There was a particular rhythm to it that I came to love. Strip the bed first, bundle the sheets, take them down to the laundry, start the wash, come back up, spray the bathroom mirror, wipe it down, replace the towels, empty the wastebasket, vacuum the rug, dust the writing desk, make the bed with fresh linen, fold the quilt, arrange the pillows, tie back the curtains, place the welcome card, final check, close the door, move to the next room. I learned the rooms the way you learn a song. Holly was the easiest, the smallest, the simplest. Maple was the trickiest because of that drawer that didn't close right and the stiff hinge on the closet door. Birch had a bathroom fan that you had to turn on and off 3 times before it would actually start. Willow had a window that fogged in the corner from a slow leak in the seal that Dell had been meaning to fix for a decade. Ash had the clawfoot tub, which was beautiful, but which collected hair around the drain in a way that required real attention. And Linden. Linden was the one at the far end of the hallway on the right side, the last room before the window. Linden had the heaviest door. Linden had the deepest closet. Linden was, I would learn, where it had happened. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first time I noticed something off, it was in Linden. A guest had checked out that morning, a quiet older man traveling alone, the kind of man who paid in cash and kept his eyes down at breakfast and asked no questions of anyone. He'd stayed 3 nights. He'd left a generous tip in an envelope on the writing desk with the words, "For the staff," written on the front in tidy handwriting. The next reservation for Linden wasn't until the following evening, so I had plenty of time. I'd had breakfast, I'd answered some emails, I'd watered the plants in the foyer, and around 10 I went upstairs with my cleaning basket and pushed open the door to Linden, expecting the usual. Stripped sheets in a pile, damp towels on the bathroom floor, the faint stale smell of someone else's sleep. Instead, the bed was made. Not roughly, the way some guests make it before leaving out of politeness. It was made the right way, the Margaret way. The quilt folded at the foot at exactly the angle in the laminated photograph. The pillows arranged in their proper hierarchy, too large in the back, too small in the middle, the embroidered one centered in front. The curtains were tied back on the left. The wastebasket was empty and lined with a fresh bag. The towels in the bathroom were folded into the small triangular shape Margaret preferred, with the embroidered edge facing out. The welcome card, which I hadn't yet refilled, was sitting on the writing desk anyway. The new one, with the new guest's name printed on it in Margaret's handwriting font. I stood in the doorway for a long time. I remember the basket getting heavy in my arms. I remember the hallway behind me being completely silent. I remember thinking, very specifically, that I had not opened a window upstairs that morning, and that the air in Linden smelled faintly like lemon and clean linen, the way it smelled after a finished reset, the way it should not have smelled if the room hadn't been touched since the old man left. My first thought was that I'd done it the night before and forgotten. I'd been tired. I'd had a long week. Maybe I'd come up after the old man checked out and reset the room without remembering, the way you sometimes drive home and don't remember the drive. That theory held for about a minute, until I realized the welcome card had the new guest's name on it, and I hadn't printed any new cards. The stack of blanks was still in the drawer downstairs. I checked. They were untouched. The printer was off. The printer made a particular sound when it warmed up, a soft mechanical sigh, and I had not heard that sound that morning, and I would have heard it from the kitchen. My second thought was that someone from the cleaning service Margaret used for deep cleanse must have come by. I called the service. They hadn't been to the house in 3 weeks. My third thought was that Margaret must have stopped in. She hadn't. She and Dell were in Portugal. I could see the time-stamped photo she'd sent the day before, the two of them standing in front of a tiled church somewhere in Lisbon, Margaret squinting into the sun. So I did what tired people do. I shrugged. I told myself it was a nice surprise. I told myself maybe the old man had been an unusually considerate guest, the kind who knew about innkeeping somehow, the kind who decided to leave the room the way it should be left. I told myself the welcome card was a coincidence, that maybe Margaret had printed it before they left and I'd forgotten. I closed the door to Linden and went back downstairs and made myself a sandwich, and when the new guest arrived that evening, a woman from Knoxville who was up for a wedding, she said the room was lovely, and I smiled and said thank you, and I didn't think about it again for almost a week. The second time was in Holly. This one I noticed faster, because I'd just stripped the bed myself. A young couple had checked out around 9, a pair of newlyweds who had been very loud the first night and very quiet the second, and who had left a thank you note and an empty bottle of champagne on their dresser. I'd gone in immediately, pulled the sheets, balled up the towels, taken everything down to the laundry room in the basement. I started the wash. I came back upstairs maybe 30 minutes later with fresh linens, and the bed was already made. With the linens I was holding in my arms. I want you to understand what that means. The clean sheets were in the closet downstairs, in a stack where I'd taken them from. I'd carried that stack up myself. I was standing in the doorway of Holly with that stack still in my arms, and the bed in front of me was dressed in identical sheets, fitted, flat, quilt folded, pillows arranged. The closet in Holly was open, and the spare set that should have been in there was gone. I checked the closet downstairs. The original stack was there, untouched, exactly as I'd left it, except that I was also holding it, or holding a copy of it, or holding sheets that looked exactly like it. I sat down on the basement steps for a while. I remember the dryer was running, and I remember staring at the round window of it, watching a single white sock tumble past again and again, and trying to think clearly. I remember thinking, this is the kind of moment where a person should be afraid. I remember waiting for the fear to come. It didn't. What I felt instead was the dull, slightly embarrassed sensation of a person who has been outpaced, of a person who has shown up to a meeting late and found the work already done by someone else. I went back up to Holly. I unmade the bed. I stripped it down to the bare mattress, and I balled up those sheets and carried them downstairs and put them in the wash too, even though they were clean. Then I went back up with the original stack and made the bed myself, slowly, deliberately, exactly the way the laminated photograph showed. I stood in the doorway for a long time afterward, looking at it. It looked the same as it had when I'd first walked in. There was no way to tell which version was mine. That's when I started keeping notes. I bought a small notebook at the drugstore down in Biltmore Village, the kind with a soft cover and a sewn binding, and I wrote down every reset. Date, room, time of checkout, time I went up to clean, state of the room when I arrived, what was already done, what wasn't. I told myself I was being scientific. I told myself if I just gathered enough data, the pattern would explain itself, the way patterns do. I told myself this was the rational approach, the calm approach, the approach a person who was not going crazy would take. The pattern did emerge. It just didn't explain itself. It happened in every room, but not every time. Some weeks it would happen 4 times in a row, and I'd start to feel like I was just there to witness the work, like a foreman who arrives after the shift is done. Other weeks I'd reset 6 rooms in a row myself, and I'd start to think I'd imagined the whole thing, that I'd been sleep-deprived, that maybe I had simply forgotten cleaning Linden that first morning and the welcome card thing was a coincidence I'd built into a mystery. There was no rhythm to it I could pin down. It wasn't tied to the moon, or to specific guests, or to the day of the week. The only thing I could find, after about 6 weeks of notes, was this. It only happened when the next guest's name was already in the system. If a guest checked out and the next reservation wasn't booked yet, the room stayed dirty until I cleaned it. If the next reservation was already on the books, sometimes the room would be ready by the time I got there. Not always. Just sometimes. As if whoever was doing it needed a name to work toward. As if they couldn't get the room ready for nobody. They needed to know who was coming. That was the first thing that made me genuinely uneasy. Not afraid yet. Uneasy, because it implied intent. It implied someone reading the reservation system. It implied someone choosing. I started watching the cameras. There are 2 of them, both downstairs. One in the foyer, one over the front porch. Dell installed them years ago after a guest claimed a piece of jewelry was stolen, which it wasn't. She found it in her car a week later. The cameras record to a hard drive in the office, and the footage loops every 30 days. There are no cameras upstairs. Margaret refused, said it would feel like a hotel and not a home, said guests deserved their privacy in the rooms and the hallway both. So I couldn't watch the rooms, but I could watch the stairs. The stairs were the only way up to the second floor, other than a small back staircase from the kitchen that came out near the linen closet, and the back staircase had a door at the bottom that I locked every night at 11. So if anything was getting up to the second floor, it had to come through one of those two staircases, and one of those staircases was in full view of the foyer camera. For 3 weeks, I reviewed the footage every morning, every single overnight clip. I watched the stairs from the moment I locked up at 11 to the moment I came down at 6. Hours and hours of an empty staircase, the moss green carpet, the banister, the small framed botanical print on the landing. Nothing ever moved. Nobody ever came down. Nobody ever went up. The light in the hallway upstairs was on a motion sensor that Margaret had installed to save electricity, and in 3 weeks of footage, the hallway light never came on at night. Not once. Which meant either nobody was walking in the hallway, or whoever was walking in the hallway was not the kind of thing that triggers motion sensors. But the rooms kept getting ready. I'll tell you the moment it tipped. The moment I stopped being a curious person keeping notes and started being something else. Something more like a guest in my own job. It was a Tuesday in October, and I had a check-out in Maple at 10 and a check-in to the same room at 4. A short turnaround, but not impossible. I went up to Maple at 10:30 with my basket. I opened the door. The bed was stripped. The towels were gone. The little welcome card from the previous guest was crumpled in the wastebasket. The curtains were untied. The room looked exactly the way it should look at the start of a reset, halfway through one, as if someone had begun the job and stepped away to get more towels. The dirty sheets were not in the room. The dirty towels were not in the room. They had been taken somewhere, and the basket I was holding had clean towels in it, but no sheets, because the sheets were already in the dryer downstairs. I had heard the dryer running. I stood there with my basket and I called out softly, "Hello?" I felt foolish doing it. I felt the way you feel when you talk to a pet you know isn't in the room. But I said it. And the house didn't answer, of course, because houses don't. But I had this very clear sense, standing there in the doorway of Maple, that I had walked in on something. That I was the interruption. That if I stayed there in the doorway, whoever was doing the work would not come back, would wait, would stand somewhere out of sight, and wait for me to leave so they could finish. The way a shy cat will wait inside a closet for you to leave the room before it eats. I backed out of Maple. I closed the door. I went downstairs and sat in the kitchen for 45 minutes, drinking coffee I didn't taste. I watched the clock on the microwave. I listened. I heard nothing. The house was as quiet as it always was during the day. That particular silence of a house with no one in it, except, of course, that there was always someone in it, because I was always there, and I had always thought of myself as the only one. Then I went back up. The room was finished. Bed made, towels stacked, curtains tied on the left, welcome card on the desk with the new guest's name, the wastebasket emptied and lined with a fresh bag, everything according to the binder, everything correct, even the small things I sometimes forgot. The water glass on the nightstand had been replaced with a clean one, upside down on a fresh paper coaster. The drawer in the writing desk had been lifted and slid in properly, the way you had to do it because of the broken runner. I want to be honest about what I felt then, because it's the part of this story I have the hardest time explaining. I wasn't scared. I was almost grateful. There was a softness to it, a sense of being looked after. I had been tired that morning. I had not wanted to clean Maple, and someone had finished what they'd started on my behalf while I sat downstairs and drank coffee. The room smelled faintly of lemon and clean linen, just like when I did it myself, just exactly like that. I stopped reviewing the cameras after that. I told myself it was because they never showed anything, which was true, but it wasn't the whole reason. The whole reason was that I had begun to feel watching them was rude. That's the word that came to me. Rude. As if I were checking up on a coworker who had never given me reason to doubt them. As if surveillance was a kind of betrayal that a person who had been quietly helping me for months did not deserve. That was the first sign that something in me was changing, that my relationship to the house was shifting. I didn't see it then. You rarely do. I want to take a moment here to describe what the days were actually like in this period, because I think it matters. The strangeness was not constant. The strangeness was the exception. Most of my days were ordinary. I would wake up around 7 in my small apartment off the kitchen. I would shower in the little bathroom that had been a butler's pantry once and was now the smallest bathroom I had ever seen. I would put on coffee in the main kitchen and set out the breakfast spread for the guests, the fruit and the yogurt, and the muffins from the bakery in town that delivered 3 times a week. I would sit in the sunroom with my own cup of coffee and watch the morning light come down through the trees. And the guests would come down 1 or 2 at a time, sleepy and pleased with themselves the way people are pleased with themselves when they've slept well in a beautiful place. They would make small talk. They would ask about hiking trails. They would tell me about their grandchildren. I would smile and answer and refill their coffee. By 10, the breakfast hours would be over, and by 11, the checkouts would happen, and by noon, the dishwasher would be running, and I would be upstairs with my basket, doing the work, room by room. It was a good job. I want to say that clearly. It was a good job, and I liked it, and I liked the house, and I liked the guests, and I liked the rhythm of it. The strangeness in those early months felt almost like a private comfort, like a secret companion. It made the house feel less empty. It made the long, quiet afternoons feel less like loneliness. There were times, walking down the upstairs hallway, when I would hum to myself, and I would have the very faint feeling that someone was humming along, just under the threshold of hearing, just behind me in the moss-green silence. I never turned around to check. I didn't want to find out I was wrong. The next thing that happened was that I started finding notes. Not from the guests, from whoever was doing the work. They were small, almost invisible. The first one was in birch. I went in to do a reset, found the room already finished, and as I walked the perimeter doing my final check, I noticed the welcome card on the desk had something written on the back, in pencil, very faint. The handwriting was small and even, slightly slanted, the kind of handwriting you'd associate with a careful person who had learned cursive in the days when cursive was still taught seriously. It said, "The toilet handle in this room sticks. I'd jiggle it twice. So should you." I stood there holding that card for a long time. I went into the bathroom. I flushed the toilet. The handle stuck. I jiggled it twice. It released. I had never noticed that before. In 4 months of cleaning birch, I had never noticed that the toilet handle stuck. Or maybe I had noticed and dismissed it. Or maybe the previous guests had all been people who didn't notice such things either. But now that I knew, I could see the small wear marks on the handle from where someone had jiggled it, twice, every time, for a long time. The note was helpful. That's the part that I keep coming back to. It was helpful. It was the kind of thing one coworker tells another to make their job easier. There was nothing threatening in it. The handwriting was patient and careful. Whoever had written it had wanted me to know. I kept that card. I put it in my notebook, taped to a page. And then I waited, because I knew, somehow, that there would be more. There were more. In Ash, 2 weeks later, on the back of the welcome card, "The radiator clangs at 3 a.m. if you don't bleed it on Sundays." Bleed it on Sundays. I had not known how to bleed a radiator. I looked it up. There was a small key in a drawer in the kitchen that I had assumed was for some lock somewhere. It was not. It was a radiator key. I bled the radiator in Ash that Sunday. The clanging stopped. In willow, on a slip of paper tucked under the lamp. Mrs. Hardy in room. Holly likes her coffee with 2 sugars. Even though she'll say 1, she'll thank you for the second. Mrs. Hardy was a regular, an older woman who came up from Atlanta 4 times a year to visit her sister in the memory care facility down the road. The next time she stayed with us, I gave her 2 sugars. She thanked me for the second one. She said, "Oh, you remembered." I had not remembered. I had been told. In Linden, written on the inside of the closet door in pencil so faint I almost missed it. The window in this room opens by itself in August. Latch it with the hook, not the slide. The slide is broken. In maple, taped to the underside of the writing desk, where I would only find it if I crouched down to dust the legs. The mattress sags on the left side. Rotate it twice a year. April and October. Mark your calendar. In holly, slipped between the pages of the laminated binder I kept on a shelf in the linen closet. The honeymooners always come in June. They like a small bowl of strawberries on the dresser, even though it's not on the menu. Don't tell Margaret. These were not warnings. They were the accumulated knowledge of someone who had done this job for a very long time and wanted me to do it well. They were the kind of thing you'd find in a binder, if Margaret had ever written a binder for the things that actually mattered. The binder she had written was about angles and folds. These notes were about the house, about how to live in it, about what it needed, about what the guests needed, even when the guests didn't say. I started doing what the notes said. I bled the radiator on Sundays. I gave Mrs. Hardy her 2 sugars, and she did thank me for the second one, and I felt for a moment that I was part of something, that I had been let in on a secret, that I was being trained. Trained. That's the word that finally made me stop and put down my coffee cup. It came to me one evening in late November, after I'd finished closing up downstairs, as I was sitting at the kitchen table writing in my notebook about that day's notes and that day's resets. I wrote the word down. I looked at it. Trained. Because that's what it was. I understood it the moment I let myself see it. I was being trained. Slowly, gently, patiently, by someone who had done this job before me, and who was still doing it, and who was teaching me how to do it the way it needed to be done. The resets were not a gift. They were not a kindness. They were lessons. The notes were curriculum. The pattern of when she helped and when she didn't was not random. It was the pattern of a teacher. Help when help is needed. Step back when the student should try. Demonstrate when the demonstration matters. Test when the test will reveal what's been learned. And the part of the lesson I hadn't understood yet was the most important part. What does the teacher do when the student has learned? I want to tell you about the photograph. Dell and Margaret keep a photo album in the parlor, on the lower shelf of the bookcase next to the fireplace. It's the kind of album you find in old houses, leather-bound, gold-edged, full of pictures of people the current owners can't always identify. I'd flipped through it once when I first moved in and hadn't thought about it since. But that night, after I understood about the training, I went and got it down and brought it back to the kitchen and started looking through it, page by page. There were photos of the inn from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Photos of guests at long dinner tables. Photos of holiday decorations. Photos of Margaret when she was younger, in front of the porch, with her hair longer and her face softer. Photos of Dell with a beard he hadn't had since I'd known him. Photos of dogs that I assumed were dead now, lying on the rug in the parlor, looking up at the camera with that particular expression dogs have when they don't understand why you are pointing the small black thing at them. And in the back of the album, in a section where the pages were stiffer because no one had touched them in a long time, there were photographs of a woman I didn't recognize. She was middle-aged in most of them, brown hair pulled back in a low knot, a simple apron. She was always doing something. Folding sheets in the laundry room, arranging flowers in a vase in the foyer, standing in the doorway of one of the upstairs rooms with a basket in her arms. She looked tired in the way that working people look tired, not unhappy, just used up by the small, consistent demands of the work, the way the bristles of a broom get worn down on one side from sweeping the same corners over and over. There was no caption under any of the photographs, no name written anywhere. She was in maybe a dozen pictures, scattered across what looked like 15 or 20 years, and in every one of them, she was working. In one of them, she was in the hallway upstairs, the moss-green carpet under her feet, the window at the far end behind her. She was looking at the camera and almost smiling, the way you almost smile when someone you don't know very well asks to take your picture. Her hand was on the doorframe of Linden. I knew it was Linden because the doorframe of Linden has a small carved detail, a tiny acorn at the top of the trim that none of the other rooms have. Margaret had pointed it out to me on my first day. She'd said, that was the original carpenter's signature. He left a different small carving on every house he built. A signature only he and the people who lived there would notice. I asked Margaret about her, the next time we spoke on the phone. I tried to sound casual. I said I'd been looking through the album and noticed a woman in some of the older pictures. Brown hair, apron, working around the house. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Oh, that must be Eleanor. She worked for us for a long time. She passed away years ago, before you were even thinking about this kind of work, probably." I asked when exactly. Margaret said, "Oh, let me think. It would have been the autumn of 2004. She had a bad heart. We didn't know. She was finishing up Linden one evening, and she just sat down on the bed, and that was that." We found her in the morning. The new guest had called down from the upstairs phone, very upset, asking why there was a sleeping woman in his room. I asked gently what they had done. Margaret said, "Well, we had to redo it, of course. We didn't want guests to know." Dell and we cleaned the room ourselves that morning. We stripped the bed and remade it, and put a new welcome card on the desk, and you would never have known. The guest moved to a different room, and we comped his stay, and we never spoke of it again. Eleanor would have wanted it that way. She was very particular about her resets. I said I was sure she was. Margaret was quiet again. Then she said, "You know, it's funny. Sometimes I think she never really left. I'd go upstairs in the years after, and a room I hadn't gotten to yet would already be done. I always assumed Dell had done it, and Dell always assumed I had. We stopped asking each other after a while. Then we hired more help, and the help would say the same thing sometimes, that the rooms got ready before they got there, and we would smile and pretend we didn't know what they meant. We didn't want to scare anyone, and eventually it stopped, or we stopped noticing, or we got too busy. And then we got old, and we hired you." I didn't say anything for a while. Margaret said, "Are you still there?" I said yes. She said, "Has it been happening to you, sweetie?" I said, "Sometimes." She said, "Oh, good. I'm so glad. I was worried she'd gone. I'm so glad she's still there." And then she changed the subject, and we talked about the weather in Portugal, and she told me a long story about a restaurant she and Dell had eaten at the night before, and we hung up. And I sat in the kitchen with the album open in front of me, and I looked at the photograph of Eleanor in the upstairs hallway, her hand on the door frame of Linden, her face almost smiling, and I tried to feel afraid of her. I tried very hard. I thought, this is a dead woman. This is a dead woman who is still cleaning the rooms in the house where she died. This is a dead woman who has been writing me notes. This is the situation, and the appropriate response is fear. But I couldn't get there. What I felt instead was something more like grief. Because Eleanor had been doing this work, alone, for over 20 years before I arrived. Resetting the rooms for guests she would never speak to, keeping the radiator quiet, latching the window in Linden in August, giving Mrs. Hardy her second sugar, making sure the honeymooners got their strawberries. And nobody had known. Nobody had thanked her. Margaret didn't even keep her photograph where it could be seen. The album was on the lower shelf, behind a stack of old gardening magazines, in a parlor that almost no one used. I think that was the night I stopped being just the night attendant. I want to describe the way the house felt to me after that conversation, because it changed. Not dramatically. The house didn't begin to feel haunted. The opposite, almost. It began to feel inhabited. It began to feel populated. I started noticing things I had not noticed before. The way the air in the upstairs hallway sometimes had a faint warmth to it, that the air downstairs did not, even when the heat was off. The way the door to Linden at the end of the hallway sometimes felt heavier to open than it should have, as if there were a slight pressure behind it from the inside, as if someone had just leaned against it. The way certain rooms, when I walked into them, smelled like a person had just stepped out. Not a guest. Not me. Someone else. Someone who wore no perfume, who used no soap I recognized, who had only the faint, clean smell of work and lemon and linen. I started saying good morning to the house when I came downstairs, quietly, just to myself, just under my breath. Good morning. I'd say it to the kitchen and to the foyer and to the stairs. Eventually, I started saying it specifically to the upstairs. Good morning, I'd say to the hallway before I went up with my basket. I felt foolish doing it. I felt the way you feel when you talk to a pet you know isn't in the room. But I noticed, after I started doing this, that the resets became a little more frequent, as if I had been polite, and the politeness had been received. The notes changed after that. They became more personal. I would find them tucked into places I hadn't checked yet, as if she knew where I was about to look. The handwriting was the same patient even pencil, but the content shifted from the practical to the procedural, to, eventually, the intimate. You're folding the corner wrong on Ash. It's the long edge first, then the short. The way you're doing it bunches by morning. You don't have to wash the spare sheets if no one slept on them. They're clean. You'll wear yourself out. There's a draft under the door of willow on cold nights. The guest will be cold. Put the extra blanket at the foot, not in the closet. They won't think to look in the closet. The old man who comes in March, the one with the cane, he can't reach the second shelf in the bathroom. Move his shaving kit to the lower shelf before he arrives. He won't ask. He'll just go without shaving, and he'll be embarrassed at breakfast. The little girl who came last weekend left her stuffed rabbit in the closet of maple. I put it on the writing desk so you would see it. Mail it back. The address is in the guest book. That last one happened. I'm not making that up. I went to Maple to do the reset, and there was a small gray stuffed rabbit on the writing desk, sitting up, leaning slightly against the lamp. I had not seen it during the family's stay. The mother had not mentioned it at checkout. I checked the guest book for the address, and I mailed the rabbit back. And 3 days later I got a thank you card from a little girl in Greenville whose handwriting was bigger than the envelope. The card had a drawing of the rabbit on the front, and the words, "Thank you for finding him," in pencil that pressed so hard the letters showed through to the other side. I taped that card into my notebook too, next to the notes from Eleanor. I felt, looking at the two handwritings on the same page, that I was running some kind of small post office between the living and the not quite living, that I was the only one who could stamp the letters and send them on. And then, one morning, in Linden, on the back of the welcome card, in handwriting that was a little less even than usual, as if the writer's hand had been tired, "You're doing well. I'm glad it's you." I sat down on the edge of the bed in Linden and I cried. I don't know why exactly. It wasn't fear. It wasn't grief. It was the strange, particular feeling of being seen by someone who had no reason to see you, and being told you were doing a good job by someone who had no obligation to tell you anything at all. I sat there for a long time. The room smelled like lemon and clean linen. The curtains were tied back on the left. The bed was made the right way, the way the binder said, the way Eleanor had made it for 20 years before me, the way she had been making it the night her heart stopped. When I stood up, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. There was a faint indentation on the bedspread next to where I had been sitting, as if someone else had been sitting there too, as if we had been sitting together. The shape of it was small, narrow, the size of a person who had not been very tall. The size, I thought, of a woman of about Eleanor's build. I smoothed the bedspread before I left the room. I did it gently, with my hand flat. I felt the faint warmth of the spot under my palm, which is the kind of thing I would have called impossible 6 months earlier, and which I now accepted with the same quiet calm with which I accepted that the radiator needed bleeding on Sundays. I want to tell you about the night I almost saw her. It was the second week of December. Snow had come down off the mountain the day before, and the inn was empty, and the trees in the back garden were heavy with white, and the silence outside was the particular, thick silence of snow, which is unlike any other silence in the world. I had no guests. I had no resets to do. I had finished my dinner. I was sitting in the parlor with a book I wasn't really reading, and a fire in the fireplace, and a glass of red wine that Dell had told me to help myself to, because it was getting old, and would not last another year. Around 10:30, I heard a sound upstairs, a small sound, the kind of sound a person makes when they are trying not to make sound. The soft creak of a floorboard near the top of the stairs, then the muffled hush of a footstep on the moss-green carpet. I froze in my chair. I listened. The footstep moved down the hallway, slowly, patiently, from the top of the stairs toward the far end, toward Linden. I counted the steps. There are exactly 14 footsteps from the top of the stairs to the door of Linden, if you walk at a normal pace. I had counted them many times, doing my final checks at night. The footsteps I heard were fewer than 14, maybe 10. Whoever was walking was taller than me, or had a longer stride, or both. The footsteps stopped. There was a pause. Then I heard the soft mechanical sound of the door to Linden opening. The door to Linden has a particular sound because of its weight. A slow, low sigh of the hinges, almost like the room itself exhaling. I had heard that sound 1,000 times. I had made that sound 1,000 times. There was no mistaking it. I sat in the parlor for a long time. The fire popped. The wine in my glass caught the light. I thought about going upstairs. I thought about not going upstairs. I thought about what I would say if I went upstairs. I thought about what I might see. In the end, I went up. I don't know why. I think it was because by that point, I had stopped being afraid of the house. I had become curious about it. and I had begun to feel, in a way I cannot fully justify, that Eleanor was lonely, that she had been lonely for a very long time, that she might want company. I climbed the stairs slowly. The hallway light did not come on. I stood at the top of the stairs and looked down the long, moss-green hallway toward the window at the far end, where the snow outside was reflecting a pale silver light into the corridor, just enough to see by. The door to Linden was closed. The door to every other room was closed. The hallway was empty. I walked to the door of Linden. I counted my steps. 14. I put my hand on the knob. I waited. I felt no warmth, no cold, nothing unusual at all. I turned the knob and opened the door. The room was empty. The bed was made the way I had made it that morning. The curtains were tied back on the left. The welcome card on the writing desk had the next guest's name on it, a woman from Charleston who was due to arrive the following afternoon. The room was exactly as I had left it. Almost. On the bedspread, near the foot of the bed, there was a faint indentation, the shape of a person sitting. It was warm. I could feel the warmth through the fabric without even putting my hand on it, the way you can feel the warmth of a chair someone has just left. I sat down next to the indentation. I didn't say anything. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes. The snow outside fell against the window in the soft, uncertain way snow does at night. The radiator, which I had bled 3 days earlier, made no sound. When I stood up to leave, my own indentation was next to hers on the bedspread. 2 faint shapes, side by side, like 2 people who had been sitting together quietly, not talking, just keeping each other company. I smoothed the bedspread before I left. I smoothed it gently. I closed the door behind me. I went down the hall and down the stairs, and I poured myself the rest of the wine, and I sat in the parlor until the fire burned down, and I went to bed, and I slept the way I hadn't slept in months. I want to tell you that I left after all of that. I want to tell you that I packed my things and called Dell and Margaret and told them I was sorry, but I couldn't do this job anymore, and I drove down the mountain and never looked back. That's the version of this story that ends the way these stories are supposed to end. It would be a clean ending, a safe one, the kind of ending you tell yourself you would choose if you were ever in a story like this. But I didn't leave. I haven't left. I'm still here. I'm telling you this from the kitchen of the inn, on a Tuesday night in February, with the wind coming down off the mountain and the radiators ticking the way they do when the temperature drops below 20. The reason I haven't left is the thing I want you to understand most, and it's the thing I have the hardest time explaining without sounding like I've lost something. The notes have stopped. They stopped about 3 weeks ago. The last one was in maple, on the back of the welcome card, and it was shorter than the others, and the handwriting was fainter than it had ever been, as if it had been written with the very last of something. It said, "I think you have it now. Thank you for letting me finish. Since then, the rooms have been waiting for me when I go up to clean them. Stripped, dirty, empty, the way they're supposed to be when nobody has touched them. I do the work myself, every reset, every fold, every angle. The toilet handle in birch sticks, and I jiggle it twice. The radiator gets bled on Sundays. Mrs. Hardy gets her second sugar. The honeymooners get their strawberries. The old man with the cane will get his shaving kit on the lower shelf when he comes in March. The window in Linden will need to be latched with the hook, not the slide, when August comes around again. And sometimes, when I'm finishing up a room, when I'm standing in the doorway doing the final check the way the binder says, I get the feeling that someone is standing behind me in the hallway, looking at the room over my shoulder, not watching me, watching the room, checking my work, the way a teacher watches a student do a problem on the board, not to catch them, but to see if they've understood. And then the feeling passes, and the hallway is empty, and the moss-green carpet swallows the sound of my footsteps as I walk back to the stairs. I think, although I cannot prove this, that the feeling is getting fainter, that she is here less and less, that she has been letting go a little more each week, that what I felt in Linden that snowy night, the 2 indentations on the bedspread side by side, was the closest she will ever come to me again, and that I should be grateful for it, because not everyone gets to sit next to the person who taught them, and not everyone gets to feel them go. I think about Eleanor often. I think about her sitting down on the bed in Linden on an autumn evening in 2004, finishing up her last reset, putting the welcome card on the desk for a guest she would never meet. I think about how she stayed. I think about how, for 20 years, she did the work alone and waited for someone to come, and watched a series of attendants pass through the house and never quite see her, and wrote them no notes, because they were not the right ones. And then I came, and she watched me for a few months, and decided I was the right one, and started to teach me. And then, when I had learned, she let go. I think about that a lot lately, about what it means to let go, about what it means to stay. I'm 34 years old. I have no children. My sister calls me on Sundays. I'm in good health, as far as I know, but I haven't been to a doctor in a while. The work is not hard. The house is quiet. The mountain in the back garden goes through its colors every year, green to gold to bare to white to green again, and the guests come and go, and the rooms get ready, and the rooms get used, and the rooms get ready again. I am the one who gets them ready now. I am the one who makes the bed the right way. I am the one who knows where the stuck handles are, and which window in August needs the hook and not the slide, and which guest takes 2 sugars, even though she'll say 1. I am the one who knows. There's a part of me that wonders, sometimes, when my own time comes, whether it will be like Eleanor's, whether I will sit down on the edge of the bed in Linden one evening, after a long day, and that will be that, whether someone will find me in the morning, whether Dell and Margaret, if they are still alive, will quietly clean the room themselves, the way they did for her, and put a new welcome card on the desk, and never speak of it to anyone, whether I will stay, the way she stayed, and wait for the next attendant to come, and watch them for a few months, and decide whether they are the right one, whether I will start writing notes in pencil, in handwriting that may or may not still look like mine, and tuck them into the welcome cards, and onto the insides of closet doors, and under the lamps, whether I will teach what I was taught, whether I will let go when the new one is ready. I don't know. I won't know. I don't think we get to know that part. What I do know is this. There are 6 rooms upstairs. Holly, ash, maple, linden, birch, and willow. 3 on the left, 3 on the right. The hallway carpet is the color of dried moss, and it muffles every footstep so completely that you can stand at one end and not hear someone walking toward you from the other. The window at the far end looks out over the back garden and the slope of the mountain. The door to Linden is heavier than the others. The door frame of Linden has a small carved acorn at the top, where the original carpenter left his signature. If you ever stay at a small bed and breakfast on the southern edge of Asheville, in a house that has been a house since 1898, and your room is exactly the way the photograph in the brochure promised, the quilt folded at the foot at exactly the right angle, the welcome card on the writing desk with your name on it in a careful handwriting font, the curtains tied back on the left, never the right. I'd like you to do something for me. Sit down on the edge of the bed, just for a moment. Don't take off your coat. Don't put down your bag. Just sit. And if you feel a faint indentation in the bedspread next to you, as if someone else had been sitting there too, as if they had been sitting there for a long time, waiting, don't be afraid. Don't get up too quickly. Don't pretend you didn't notice. It's only the person who got the room ready before you. They're glad it's you. They've been hoping you would come. They have so much to teach you, if you'll let them. The work is not hard. The house is quiet. The mountain in the back garden goes through its colors every year. And one day, when I've taught you what I know, I'll be glad to let you finish. I'll be glad it was you.